So, you know, these intelligences are important. They're not the only things that are important, obviously. There are character elements to leadership. And we're stupid if we ignore the fact, you know, that we look for character elements in our leaders. You know, we look for personality, we look for values, integrity, conscientiousness, prudence, openness, temperateness, you know, non-reactivity. Important things that we look for that are part of their character. And of course, we look for aspiration. We look for people who want to lead. Now, I make a distinction, by the way, between people who want to hold leadership positions, there are lots of those around, as opposed to those who actually want to lead, who want to do the hard work of leadership, and sometimes the unpleasant work of leadership. I mean, there are three mythologies of leadership. You know, three myths, stuff I was taught when I was a young manager, that are absolutely untrue. Myth number one, there is a learning curve. Everybody heard of the learning curve? You know, it's supposed to be the relationship between time and how much you learn. So in early days, you learn a lot. Then as you have more experience, it starts to flatten out in the middle years. And then the last third is easy because you know everything. Well, there is actually a learning curve. The problem is it's shaped the other way. In fact, as you learn, you find out, you learn, that the more you know, the more there is to know. And as you learn more of that, the more you realize how much there is that you don't know. And really good learners, or really good leaders, are constant learners. And they tell me they're learning more every day, right up to the end of their careers and beyond. Okay? A constant learning process. One of the things they're learning is how to handle people. You learn more and more about that as you go on. The second myth of leadership, by the way, is that the further you're up in organizations, the higher you are to the top, the more you see and understand about what's going on. That's an absolute myth. And every leader of large organizations will say his or her hardest job is actually understanding what's going on at the bottom. Because like a mountaineer, you know, there's the clouds between the summit and the base. You climb up the mountain, the clouds get deeper and deeper and deeper. The third myth about leadership, by the way, is a more personal one. It's the idea, I remember I used to have this, the idea that the higher I went up in organizations, the more I would be able to do the things I really like to do. That's the biggest myth. The higher you go up in organizations, the less you get to do of what you really like to do. And the more you have to do those things you don't like to do extremely well. And the measure of the leader is very much how they're prepared to do those things that they don't naturally like to do that well, but they learn to do them very well because they have to be done. And I'm going to suggest that having tough conversations is frequently in that category of things that we don't necessarily like to do, but we really have to do them very well. And that in fact, the ability, the skill, the judgment around tough conversations is a critical part of people's intelligence. Now, where do they matter? I'm going to talk about two areas, and they're very different areas. One is having tough conversations with respect to performance. I'm not here just talking about having a tough conversation with the person who isn't performing. You may be having a tough conversation with the person who is a good performer, but you are going to raise the bar. You're going to increase what good performance means. and you're going to increase it every year. We're going to build in, you know, a 3 to 5% productivity improvement ratio in the quality of performance. And so this hurdle is going to be increased. It may be that you have an excellent performer in 90% of the job. The other 10% of what they have to do is really being done poorly. And you have to have the discussion about this 10%, because the 10% threatens the effectiveness of the person, even though the other 90% is great. You know, this is autobiographical. You know, I was a very young product manager at the Water Lambert organization. I was a terrific product manager. I think I was the best product manager the company's ever had. But God, I used to get people annoyed with me, particularly the sales force. And the sales force were critical to your work as a product manager. And so I come out with these great new products, these great new promotional campaigns, whatever it happened to be, ideas, and I get them through, I get them done. But it was a horrible cost to the organization of my achieving what I needed to achieve for my brand. And finally my manager took me aside and had a tough conversation with me. Probably 2 years after it should have happened, but eventually he did it, and we were able to fix the problem. So, you know, that's what a tough conversation can be involved. The other kind of tough conversation we have to have is not around the performance of people, but about their potential and about their development. And here the conversations may be people's aspirations may be somewhat greater than you happen to think they are. You need to talk about the gap. Sometimes you think they have more potential than they think they have. They may not aspire to the things that you think they're capable of. You may need to have a conversation about that, about trying to get people to raise their aspirations. So, you know, many areas in which we have to have tough conversations. I'm going to talk about the things that are part of this tough conversation. When I first came into, my first job was in, first full-time job was in 1962. I joined a company, Abbott Laboratories in the UK, and they had an interesting system of performance appraisal. It was called a critical incident system. And you kept a file on each individual, and in that file you recorded the good things they did during the year and the bad things they did during the year. And on the date of their annual performance appraisal, you pulled out the file and ambushed them with it. Particularly with the bad things that they done. Okay? So, you know, your performance appraisal may be on November the 15th, you sit down and say, on May 26th last year in this meeting, you said such and such and such and such, and that really upset somebody and wasn't a good way of... They look at you and they say, what the hell are you talking about? But they didn't say this. They just look stone-faced. They don't remember what happened. They have no recall of that incident. It's not relevant to them. It's not a timely way of doing things. And one of the first things I think we have to recognize is, if you're going to have a tough conversation, have it soon. Have it close to where the problem originates. Have it at the right time. Be contemporary. Now, when I say that, you never have a tough conversation in anger. You know, when you're angry, you have the worst conversations. They're the ones you'll regret later. You can be a little bit excited. You're not angry. And you can't have a tough conversation when somebody else is incredibly emotionally upset. So there has to be, some judgment used about how soon you can have this discussion. But don't put it off. I worked many years as an arbitrator of labor disputes. And it used to sicken me a little bit when I would see people being terminated from their jobs, being fired. And they would appeal the decision to a tribunal, and I would chair the tribunal, and the performance record would come into evidence. And you'd look down the performance record, and you'd see 10 years. Satisfactory, 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 good, good, satisfactory, good, satisfactory, fired. You say, well, what's the reason for termination? They say, well, they've never been any good. And say, no. She said they were good. Nobody called it properly. Nobody had seen fit to say, as of this time, right now, these people are not performing. So you end up getting a record really that doesn't mean it. So if there's a performance issue, deal with it now. If there's a developmental issue, deal with it now. Don't put it off for someone to deal with 10 years from now. Be candid, honest, open, straightforward, authentic. Never cruel, never cruel. Never not compassionate. Okay? But candid, honest, straightforward. I'm going to talk a little bit more about this because I recognize in some cultures being candid, honest, straightforward is more difficult than in other cultures. So I'm going to leave it for 5 minutes and come back to it and deal with some of the other elements. Third requirement. By the way, we're going to send you this whole slide deck by email immediately after this session, so you will have it. Third important element in having a tough conversation is that people understand the consequences. So they understand why you're having this conversation and that something will happen unless the issue is dealt with, or if the issue is dealt with. So, you might want to say to yourself, look, I know you're interested in promotion. I'm interested in your being promotable. We have that common interest. But unless this particular area is fixed, it's not going to happen. There are consequences, okay, to this. If you want to satisfy your aspirations, it is contingent on you doing some things, or some things happening. And that needs to be fixed with people. They understand why this discussion is taking place. Now, being candid and talking about consequences can be threatening. It can make people, unless you're very careful, seize up and go into a corner. You have to do two things in order to make being consequential and being candid acceptable. Firstly, you've got to be constructive. It has to be clear that the reason we are having this discussion is to come to a better outcome. If that isn't the case, send people a memo. Send them an email. If you're having a discussion, it's got to be constructive. We have to be seeking a better outcome, and on a personal level, it's got to be collaborative. They have to believe that you are prepared to work with them to get a better outcome for them and for you. If it's constructive and collaborative, you can be candid and deal with consequences without hurt feelings, without major problems occurring. You may have a little hurt feelings. But if you're destructive, and you're not collaborative, then what you've really managed to do is just beat up on somebody. You vented, you criticize without moving it through. There are two other things we require to close the sequence. Firstly, you have to be able to reach consensus about what a good outcome is. They cannot leave the conversation thinking if I do A, it's good, while you're thinking, no, they need to do B. There's got to be an alignment of those things. You've got to agree on what a good outcome is, and then finally, you've got to get commitment. You have to get them to say, I understand, this is the issue, this is what I have to do, this is what you're going to do to help me, and I commit that I am going to do it by such and such a time, to such and such a level. I'll give you an example of this. For many years, I shared an administrative assistant with one of my colleagues, another professor at the school. And I would do her performance appraisal 1 year, and he would do it the next year. I was doing it 1 year, and we had a good conversation, some issues, but overall the performance was good. And I did what I had always done for years and years and years after these discussions. I wrote her a letter saying, it was a good discussion, good thing, we agreed this and that and the other, etc. Have a great year ahead. And I was just finishing it, and Jim, my colleague, tapped over my shoulder and says, what are you doing? I said, well, I'm writing a Joanna letter. He said, no. He said, don't do it. What do you mean don't do it? I've always done it. He says, you're doing it the wrong way. I said, why? He says, you should get her to write the letter to you. What you want to have happen is she tells you what she's heard, what she's agreed to do, and that she's going to do it. Because that way you have commitment. When you write it, all you have is a demand. And in many cases, when you have a conversation and you follow it up with your record of the conversation, all you're doing is stamping your foot. Now hear me. This is what I've said. Get it. Understand it. You're not getting commitment. It's like shouting at your kids to clean up their rooms. The more you shout, the more the ears close. Okay? What you really want to have your kids say is, I understand, Mother, Father, that you wish me to clean up my room. I understand that the consequences of my not doing that is I won't be allowed any video games for a week, and I am going to do it, and you can inspect my room tomorrow. That's commitment, okay? Might be a dream, but that's what you want. Okay? You want commitment. Really good, tough conversations have all of those elements. Now, one of the things that I hate about PowerPoint slides, and I also hate them when I come up with fancy labels that are all C's or something like this, is it makes it look easy. It isn't easy. And I don't want to suggest for one moment that you can sit down and have a tough conversation in half an hour or 20 minutes that hits all of these points. In fact, some of these conversations have spread over weeks or months. One I can think of spread over a couple of years, because lots of things interfere with doing this. People may be very agitated, they may be very upset. You may have to wait an extended period of time before you're able to move along the pathway. And I think the most difficult element of all of it is in the question of being candid. And I want to spend a bit of time on being candid. Candor is openness. Candor is being straightforward. Candor is not by obfuscating or confusing things or wrapping things up. You know, when you have that kind of conversation that says, you know, you're terrific, you're great, you're wonderful, you're the best employee I've ever had. You've got a problem, and this is a bit of a problem, this is a bit of a... But don't worry about it, you're really terrific. What have you communicated in that? Only that you're terrified of raising